Welcome to Mountain Strong. Today I am in Eagle River, Alaska, just north of Anchorage, Alaska, and I'm here at Mirror Lake. And so Mirror Lake during the summertime looks to be a little bit of a fishing spot just north of Eagle River here. Also seems to be a place that would be quite beautiful during a nice sunny day here in the summertime. You'd be able to see the reflection of that mountain over there in the lake, and so just a nice little stop to make on a nice summer day. But of course during the winter time, not a bad stop either. There's a certain beauty that sets in at this time of year as well, even though it's very cold. And so I'm going to jump right into the psalm for today. We're going to be having a look at Psalm 138. Let's go ahead and read that now. I give you thanks, O Lord, with my whole heart. Before the gods I sing your praise. I bow down toward your holy temple and give thanks to your name for your steadfast love and your faithfulness. For you have exalted above all things your name and your word. On the day I called, you answered me. My strength of soul you increased. All the kings of the earth shall give you thanks, O Lord, for they have heard the words of your mouth. And they shall sing of the ways of the Lord, for great is the glory of the Lord. For though the Lord is high, he regards the lowly, but the haughty he knows from afar. Though I walk in the midst of trouble, you preserve my life. You stretch out your hand against the wrath of my enemies, and your right hand delivers me. The Lord will fulfill his purposes for me. Your steadfast love, O Lord, endures forever. Do not forsake the work of your hands. The psalmist finds himself in a circumstance where he is dealing with the surrounding of gods, Elohim, mighty ones. Now, are these mighty ones the gods of idolatry? In other words, does the psalmist find himself in a circumstance where he is surrounded by false religions? Or are these mighty ones, as it is occasionally used in the Bible, people of prominence or of power? I don't know if this is a political force against him or a cultural religious force against him, but he finds himself surrounded by people who are not on his side and therefore are also not on God's side because he is on God's side. So how do you stand in worship to God when you are surrounded by influencers who are trying to exert their power and their strength over you, either through peer pressure or through perhaps danger of punishment? How do you stand in these circumstances and continue to praise and worship God? I think the psalm has some very powerful reflections for us if we find ourselves in those circumstances, and I would dare say that we do, because whenever we go to the school place, the workplace, any place in the world, we are surrounded with people who don't truly believe in God. Even if they have an idea of God, they don't have a true understanding often of the God of the Bible. And so, how do we continue to praise God in those kind of circumstances? Well, I love how he finds himself in this circumstance and he says, I'm gonna praise you, God. I'm gonna bow down to your temple. I'm not going to bow down in their temples. I'm not going to join in their worship, but I'm going to bow down to your temple and I'm going to give thanks to your name. And so there's this idea that if I want to stick with God, I've got to glorify God, but then I've also got to give thanks to God. And I mirror that with what we've seen this throughout the Psalms and been reminded of the fact that in Romans chapter 1, when the Gentile world fell away from God, they fell away from God because they didn't give him thanks and they didn't give him glory. And so the psalmist finds himself in this circumstance. He says, I'm going to do both. I'm going to give God glory. I'm going to give God thanks. I'm going to orient myself towards where I want to be, amongst God's people, worshiping my God, not where I am. And that's important to remember. Our heart should always be with our church family. Our heart should always be with fellow Christians. Our heart should always be focused and our affections focused on heavenly things. Because the moment that we transfer those to where we are and the moment that we give up on the importance of those things in our lives is the moment that those Elohim, those gods, that they begin to infiltrate our heart, our life, and our mind. And so he says, I'm going to have reverence, I'm going to have gratitude, I'm going to give thanks, and I'm going to continue to remember that your name and your word are exalted and far above me. Now, it's one thing to say that, but it's another thing to actually achieve that. You say, I want to glorify God, I want to give him thanks. Well, you can't just say thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. You have to have some reason to give thanks. And there's plenty of reason to give thanks to God, don't get me wrong. But unless you're purposeful in your thanksgiving and your praise, those aren't going to mean much in terms of keeping you on the side of God. And so the psalmist goes into a series of reflections and a series of things that he's going to think about that's going to help him to manifest praise and thanksgiving in his life. And so verse 3, first of all, he's going to focus on God's past help. How God was there when he called to him in the past. And so, again, reflecting upon those past times where God has answered prayer. Verses 4 and 5, he's also going to focus on the future victory that he knows God is going to win and work in his life. All the kings of the earth shall give you thanks. Everyone's going to be doing what I'm doing one day. It's important to remember that as a Christian, because you feel sometimes like, I'm in the minority, and I'll never be it'll never be shown that what I'm doing is right and good and the right choice to make in life. But it will. Every knee is going to bow, every tongue is going to confess. And so the kings of the earth, the mighty ones, the mighty rulers of earth, and the mighty ones in the heavenly realm even, they're all going to bow to the Father and bow to the Son. And they will sing of the ways of the Lord, for great is the glory of the Lord. And so again, he sees how God is going to win victories, and how he's even going to incorporate the strength of those around him in praise. In verse 6, he reflects upon those who God is going to receive. In verse 6, it says, though the Lord is high, he regards the lowly, but the haughty he knows from afar. If I'm going to continue and persist in my praise of God, I've got to remember to be humble. I can never forget that. I need to be mighty in the face of my enemies, but I need to be humble in the presence of my God. And remember that my pridefulness will drive him far from me. But then number 4, he reflects upon how God will help him. Though I walk in the midst of trouble, you preserve my life. He sees God as being continually active, and so he knows he's going to be continually active throughout this moment. And that's ultimately how he closes out the psalm, with the realization that God is in this moment. He is surrounded by false gods, or he is surrounded by mighty ones, whatever the case might be. Even though he is surrounded by people who are not on the side of God and don't believe in God, God is there, and God has a purpose for this moment. But he will never see that purpose positively in his life unless he remains on the side of God through, again, praise and thankfulness. And so the Lord will fulfill his purpose for me. Your steadfast love, O Lord, endures forever. You remember that from 136? God has a purpose for this moment. His mercy will carry you through. His steadfast love will see you through it. Persist in praise, persist in thanksgiving, and reflect upon what the psalmist reflects upon, these 5 things: God's past help, his future victory, those God is going to receive, how God is going to help, and God has a purpose for this moment. His mercy is going to endure, so seek it. It's very appropriate the way this psalm ends. It's not as though this is merely a set of, these are the things that I'm going to do. It closes out by saying, don't forsake the work of your hands, a short prayer of the psalmist to God to help his situation. It's prideful to try to stand alone when we are surrounded by false hoods. A lot of people try to do that. They think if I just study enough, I'll be prepared for any argument that I can encounter in the workplace or the school place. Well, you might study well, but the best preparation for any battle that we face in this life is to bow our knees to God and ask for deliverance. To bow our knees to God and give glory and praise to him. To bow our knees to God and say thank you for all that you have done for me. So when we find ourselves surrounded by falsehood, may we always persist in our praise and thanksgiving of God. And of course, may God bless you today.